Well, welcome back. In the prior session, I talked about this conundrum that exists in the minds and in the heads of most men, where we have a concept of what we believe the ideal benefits of marriage are, and I contrasted that against what I believe to be the reality of what you get from marriage. And I was trying to explain that the two are almost worlds apart. The difference is not just marginal, it's significant. And I concluded that in almost all instances, obviously, there are exceptions, but in the majority of the cases, perhaps that's a better term to use, that most men get far less from marriage than they originally anticipated or expected. Now, in discussing this with someone earlier, I felt perhaps it would be useful to expand on this slightly further. And the idea here is to say that when two people come together, before they come together, they have expectations. Those expectations sometimes have, I guess, to be forfeited. There's some compromise that has to be made somehow between both parties. If they accept the terms, then whatever they decide for themselves is perfectly acceptable because it's a union between two people. I was explaining that the cost of marriage to a man, when compared to the benefits of marriage, are not to be treated as parity or equal, because the benefits are far, far, far less than the cost. And therefore, I said that there are three things most modern men should keep in mind. At the center of this is that marriage should be put aside and should not be considered. If you do not want to have children, do not consider getting married. Because really, in modern society today, in the developed West, I can only see one benefit. And one of the saddest parts of that is that the same benefit can be obtained without going through the process of signing a contract, because that's what marriage is. In any case, in today's session, I'd like to expand on the whole concept of what a man gets from marriage. And so I'm going to be talking about post the marriage, what really happens. Let me begin with a statement, which is, now when you have a marriage, I think we misunderstand greatly what the concept of marriage is. In my opinion, marriage is simply the death of two people and the birth of a new union. To put it in a different term, you have two people come together and joined as one. So in many ways, you die to your former self, the selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed person, and you become one with someone else. You merge, and in many ways, you treat each other as one. And that means that if one person feels a pain, then both should actually experience, not equally, but experience that together. And if one person is happy, then the joy should be shared. But the idea is you let go of your former self, the individual, and you become a unit. Now, most marriages in modern society today still work on the concept that both of you are individuals. You're independent and you're whole as an individual. Now, obviously, that brings about a number of very, very unfortunate scenarios. One of which is that everyone is looking out for themselves. So let me address this from a male's perspective so that especially the men can understand how in many ways we are deluded. One of the benefits from the ideal perspective that men believe that marriage is important is because they would have unlimited sex. In many ways, the burning desire in the hearts of most men is to shag, is to get laid, is sex. That more than anything motivates most of our decisions, especially the younger we are. But connected to that is the desire to please the other person. But men are mostly motivated by sex. So let me paint a scenario. A single guy lives on his own and he's obviously in the market. He has, let's say, 2 or 3 female friends that he has benefits from. Call it friends with benefits. On any given day of the week, he has access to 3 people. So he can pick up the phone and let's call them Mary, Jane, and Rachel. And on Monday, he can spend the night with Rachel, and the next day, Jane, and the next day, Mary, and then he rotates again. In any case, if one person says, I have other commitments, I can't see you today, he picks up the phone and calls the other person. In other words, someone substitutes for the other. Now, the 3 of them perhaps know, or they do not know usually, which is the case. But in any case, it means that his desire for sexual satisfaction is met to an extent, because there's always a substitute. He doesn't gripe, he doesn't complain, he doesn't worry, he doesn't condescend on the woman, he doesn't throw his tantrums, he doesn't make a fuss. The reason being, he's single, so he gets to choose who he spends his time with if one person is not available. The concept the men have in their minds, which is a false concept, is that if I get married, then I do not have to go through all of that inconvenience and all the time and the stress and the money costs of having to rotate women for the purpose of meeting my sexual needs. So in his mind, he thinks, I get unlimited sex because now I'm married and both of us are one. Now, in any case, let's also assume that that's just one person. Let's call him Smith. And let's use another person called Harry. Harry, on the other hand, perhaps is not as adventurous as Smith, and maybe he just has one girlfriend. They've just started dating, and every time he wants sex, he picks up the phone and he meets up with his girlfriend. And she gives it to him as many times, 2-3 times sometimes during the day. So he's not denied of his desires. And so he thinks, if I get married to this beautiful young lady, then I get sex unlimited number of times, whenever I want it. Now that is the first misconception post-marriage. There is something to keep in mind, and that's why I begin the first, is that women have a monopoly on sex once they get married, or once a woman gets into a serious relationship. Whether you're cohabiting or co-living, or are in an exclusive relationship, a mono relationship, or whether you're married. Women control access, and they're more like gatekeepers to their body. So they decide when sex happens. But what is sad, but what is true, is that the same woman who, before you became exclusive and before you took the relationship very seriously, was happy to meet your desires and your needs, as soon as you get married, there is a sudden decline, both in the frequency, the intensity, the amplitude, the duration, the timing of sex. In other words, sex happens when she wants it to happen. Again, she has the keys. She's the gatekeeper to her body. The point being that the ideal the man had in his mind and the reality which he's now experiencing are two worlds apart. The issue is not necessarily that the woman has no right to decide when she wants to have sex. Of course, she does. The issue is that in the context of a marriage, if both of us are one, then one person should not necessarily, without good cause, deny the other person of a need that they can meet, for which the person has sworn on oath or has made a promise not to seek that need outside of the marriage covenant. In more simple terms, if I am married to you, you being the lady, and I've made promises, and I've made a promise to you, made an oath in the presence of other people, to be with you across all certain, various scenarios, that means I cannot seek sex outside of our union. And if you are the only person who can meet that need, and if you are not selfless in that process, then it means that within reason, my needs will be met. I wouldn't go starving. I wouldn't have to beg. Now, my experience, having spoken with so many people who are married, is that the quantity of sex declines drastically once they got married. The frequency, the duration, the intensity, the timing drastically declined. Why? Because their wives had the monopoly. They could say no. And I'll say something perhaps I should deal with in a different session, just so I don't spend too much time on this one point. And that is a woman who, and this is, keep this in mind. I'm not talking about all women. I'm saying most women. They use sex as a bargaining tool to control the man. For example, if you don't do X and Y, then you wouldn't have sex with me. Or you have to do A, B, C. So it's always a case where, because a man needs sex, we do not want sex, we need sex to function. And because the woman can go longer without sex than a man can, sex is used as a weapon against the man. So that's the first item to keep in mind, that whilst there might be a feeling, an ideal scenario that you might have in your mind, that once you're married, you have sex on demand, you have it as many times as you want, the frequency will be great. What tends to happen is the opposite. Now, the second item is this, and this is where it gets slightly sensitive. Again, when I'm having these conversations, I'm not having these conversations from a moral perspective. I couldn't care less. I'm not having it from a value perspective or an ethical perspective. I'm not saying what's right or wrong per se. I'm just dealing with the reality. I'm talking about results. What are the results? And it's up to you to interpret the results the way you wish. But the second point is this, and this applies to both marriage and exclusive relationships. My experience and my observation has been that once the man has signed on the dotted line, or signed the marriage certificate, or gone through the wedding, his wife gets larger in size. They become bigger. Now, they become bigger irrespective of whether they have children. Now, I'll deal with that separately. The point being that, I've said this before, and perhaps that's something I should deal with separately, that dating is a very deceptive game. Everyone puts their best foot forward. The woman does everything she can in order to convince the man that she's the right person to choose. So my experience has been, whenever I go to the gym, and this is something you can observe for yourself, in the gym, I find that I seldom see married women in the gym. I usually see single women, divorcees, people who are about to be separated, or people who have, for whatever reason, made a choice. Either they've just left a relationship or they're about to go into one. But I tend to find that those who are very interested in staying in shape, looking their best self, tend to be outside of those who are married. As soon as people get married, they become lazy. It's almost as though there is no reason to stay sexy, to stay attractive, to remain beautiful, because you already have the man, you're married. And the idea is that now the man has married you, and now you have a monopoly in sex, and now he cannot go outside of the wedding vow. The woman doesn't care. So the attention that was paid to looking attractive, looking beautiful, staying youthful, maintaining a healthy weight and height and body size, etc., is thrown out of the window. On the aggregate, those who are married are much, much larger than they were before they got married. As a matter of fact, you even see this in women intentionally go on a diet just for the wedding. They starve themselves for 12 months just to look perfect for the wedding. And once they've actually lost weight and the wedding is over, they do what we all do, which is if you lose something, subconsciously, the natural process is for you to find what you lost. So if you lose weight with a specific intention of a particular goal, once the goal has been achieved, what you call it, the rubber band effect, you snap back to how you were. So you go and find the weight that you lost and you put it back on. And that simply means that what men get, here is something perhaps a guarantee. And I know time takes its toll on every one of us, no doubt. Now, what I'm not referring to, your height per se. There's something you can do about your weight. I'm not referring to your face. You're born with that. Some of these things are incidental to who you are. You can't change that. But there's something you could do. You can control the movement between your plate and your mouth. You can control the amount of exercise and calories you burn. You can control to be healthy for yourself. And the man benefits from you looking attractive. Men are very visual. And the concept that is perhaps not understood by women is, you will always love me for who I am. And I had this conversation with someone some time back. And they said to me, I'm sure you would always love me for who I am. And I said, yes, but I will miss you. Because if you're thinking that I have to stay, irrespective of whether you get to a 300-pound weight and blow up in size, men are visual. We need to be stimulated by what we see. And that is something that marriage, most men do not take into account, is that when you start dating a woman, that is the best figure, shape that she would ever be in, except she already has the discipline in her system, except she's already subconsciously attuned to looking her best self, which is partly the reason why every time a man goes astray, not always, but most of the time when he goes astray in a marriage and there's infidelity, in most cases, if you look at the size of the wife and you look at the size of the mistress, you tend to find a huge difference. In any case, let me not dwell on that for too long, but suffice it to say that what is promised and what is delivered in beauty and attractiveness are worlds apart. Now, the third item I should talk about is, in some weird, in my opinion, weird, nasty way, women, once they are married, or once they've committed to a relationship, and once they've got the man's promise to remain in the relationship, whether this is in a partnership, or whether you're cohabiting, or whether you're just dating, there is almost, especially if you live together, I should say this, the key is if you live together, there is almost something insidious that takes place from the moment when the exclusivity begins. Because in principle, what men are hoping to get, the reason we spend money on dating and hope to marry is because we believe we're getting exclusivity. In any case, once that process begins, where both of you are living together, married, in an exclusive relationship, the woman takes on a project, what I call a makeover project. You see these makeover projects and shows, across the television. You buy a house and you're looking for ways to improve the house, to increase the value. In any case, it's a makeover project of the man by the woman, where all of the things that she found attractive about you when you were dating become an irritation to her post-marriage. She starts to look for ways to make you, in her eyes, more sophisticated. In other words, to change you. You're not good enough. You're good, but not quite good enough. And if we just got rid of all of, those scales on your skin, that would make you more of a Renaissance man, more well-rounded. So she embarks on this project to make you over, which I think is a dangerous thing to do, because in principle, it means you have to change to meet her ideal image. Now, the consequence of that leads me to item number 4, in which most men, and let me say this is so subtle that sometimes it's not easy to know in the process when it's taking place. There's a saying that a chains of habit are too light to be felt until they become too heavy to be broken. In a more simple way, in a less philosophical way, how do you kill a frog? If you want to kill a frog, you put it in cold water, and then you slowly increase the temperature of the water, and over time the frog gets comfortable until the frog is cooking. And before the frog recognizes that it's too late, it's dead. Whereas if you took the same frog, and you were to throw the same frog into hot water, the frog would jump out. Its reaction would be to jump out. And what that simply means is that a lot of these changes that take place occur in a very subtle fashion. Now, this leads me to item number 4, which is where I can expand on this, which leads to a loss of his manhood. So you're getting married. I would stake a significant sum that there will be an erosion of your manhood, especially if you are not the kind of man who stands firm. Loss of manhood, I'm referring to, as part of the woman's makeover attempt, she stops him from seeing his friends. She stops him from engaging in hobbies and activities that he's always done all of his life. She stops him from dressing in a certain way. She tries to control what he says publicly. She tries to educate him, just like mom will, on several issues. So as part of that makeover, you tend to find that everything that he had as part of his self-image, his self-identity, his work, his inner circle, his outer circle, where he got to release a lot of his energy and stress, which most of the time comes from either watching sports, playing sports, or just hanging out with the boys. She starts to stop all of those activities for which she once admired, or for which she once pretended that she admired. Terrible, terrible thing. Like, I have had friends who post-marriage, this was quite sad to observe, because, and now you might be sitting there thinking there must have been weak men. And the answer is no. Again, how do you kill a frog? You put it in cold water, and then you just turn up the temperature ever so slightly. And before the frog knows what's happening, it's cooking. Now, because a man's ultimate desire is sex, he would compromise on almost anything just to ensure that he gets that sex. Even when he can get better outside or elsewhere. But in any case, there's a loss of manhood of the type that I have seen even with friends that people I've known for years, people I've known since they were kids. They turned out to be different men once they got married. And in many cases, there wasn't a need. Both the old person and the new person that he was supposed to be as part of the union, they could have coexisted. I don't think women understand the importance of giving the man the space he needs to release, just like a pressure cooker, to release all that energy. And that could be, once a week, time with the boys. That could be once every 2 weeks, watch a football game. That could be once every week, go out, play some sports. But all of that stops. Now, usually, the death of a man's hobbies, the death of a man's connection with his boys, his friends, his male support system, the death of what made him who he was before he met you, usually leads to the early stages of the midlife crisis. Because in many ways, he's in a very short period of time trying to reinvent himself. And at some point he awakens into who he's been reinvented to be. The problem is that he's not who he wants to be. Who he is as part of the makeup is not what he wants to be. And if you combine that process of change with what I've said so many times, that is to be the most important reason, one of why you shouldn't get married, is until you've achieved your dreams. Because men sacrifice their dreams too early, it then turns out that after about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, they realize that they sacrificed too much. They've lost everything that made them who they were. In any case, this leads me to item number 5. I've lost count on the numbering system, 5 or 6, it doesn't matter. And that is, as part of the makeover process, the home that is meant to be a sacred, safe place becomes a landmine where he has to almost walk in on eggshells, things he cannot do in the house. Let me put it in a different way. Without exception, this has been the case in my observation around my friends of friends and across friends of, say, acquaintances that I have. The home becomes a place where it's as though there is a listening ear. So, for example, there are things he cannot do in the house. Now, it doesn't matter whether the home was his house before he got married, or whether both acquired the home together as a couple. She sees the house as her house. He sees the house as our home. So she lays down the law. You can't smoke in the house. Now, again, I don't care about the morality or whether it's right or wrong. She says you can't drink within a certain time frame. You can't have parties in the house. She gets to choose who visits their house. Now, I'm not introducing whether they are kids just yet. Put that aside. But she gets to choose. So if he wants to see his friends, he has to check with his wife first, make sure that she approves before the event can go ahead. She decides what happens in the house. He doesn't have a space, whether that be a box, shoebox, or man cave, For him, I said this to a friend the other day. I said, if you're going to move in with someone he was thinking about moving in with, I said, just make sure you have an outbuilding if you can. And let that be your space where you can play, you can be yourself. If you want to walk around naked, great. If you want to sit there and play video games, awesome. If you want to sit there and rap or sing or dance, fantastic. But you need a space where you can release. A space perhaps where if your friends want to come and visit, you can be boys. You don't have to worry about upsetting the missus. But if you can't afford an outbuilding, make sure you have a room, dedicated room for yourself, because it's time that you need for yourself. Now, let me share something very quickly. In having a conversation with someone, he mentioned to me of another friend who married every month. He pays for a hotel for the weekend every month. He tells his wife that he's going away on business. He checks into the hotel. Guess what? He does nothing. He's not playing the field. He's not cheating on his wife. Never cheated on his wife. Well, based on his words. But he says he has to check out of the house because he needs to breathe. Powerful, powerful statement. That he needs to breathe. And that in the house, his wife will not let him breathe. She keeps wanting to do everything together that he can't breathe. So every month, now this is a very wealthy, well-to-do person. He checks into a hotel for the weekend, once a month. And he just sits in the hotel, orders takeaway, watches movies, speaks to loved ones, speaks to his boyfriends. They get to come down and hang out with him sometimes, not always, sometimes. And all he does is recuperate for the month. Now, isn't it sad that he has to do all of that outside of the framework of the family? So recognize that the landmine I'm referring to is very dangerous. Sometimes women do not know that that's what they're creating. But the result is that that's what you have created. In many ways, you've created a monster. So let me go through these 5 or 6 items that I mentioned, just as a way of bringing it back together. The first is a monopoly in sex, the fact that the man gets less sex. The second has to do with a larger wife, a bigger girlfriend, someone who's no longer taking care of themselves. Now, if a child has come into the picture, granted, because every woman, when you have a child, will put on between 15 and 25 kilograms. You would usually lose about, over a year, you should lose, all things being equal, about, say, 20% of that. The remaining will stay, except you intentionally try to lose the remaining. So I'm not referring to the process of giving birth, because that's the highest honor a woman gives a man. I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to specifically the refusal to pay the price post-pregnancy to retain or to regain the attractiveness you once had. Again, not a judgment I'm making, I'm just simply saying that's the reality. The third has to do with the fact that the woman makes the man over. She wants to make him over. It's almost like a process of reconstructing the St. Paul's cathedral. You're good, but not good enough. So we'll just make you over. We'll just make you more of a well-rounded man and a man who fits what I want. Now let me just say something that perhaps I didn't introduce before, which is this. The qualities she admired, wittiness, spontaneous, sometimes unreliability, those qualities that she found desirable when you were dating. Maybe you played in a band, you had long hair, perhaps you rode motorcycles. She gets you to become more responsible to give up all of those qualities. Cut your hair, leave the band, stop doing this sports, stop playing rugby, stop playing football. You can't play football every week. And guess what? Eventually, when you succumb to all of those things, she will fall in love with someone else outside the family who has the same qualities that you once had. And this is a fact. The same qualities that she removed as part of her makeover process will be the same qualities she finds desirable when she gets bored of you. Because like all projects, at some point it comes to an end. And once she's seen what she's created, the monster that you have become, she no longer finds that attractive. So you become boring. She becomes less stimulated, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. As a matter of fact, I know people who had phenomenal bodies. I mean, phenomenal bodies. But that meant every day they had to go to the gym, spend at least an hour, sometimes an hour and a half in the gym, crafting their physique. And these are men. As soon as they got married, they had to give up going to the gym because the wife said, that's 2 hours, if you include traveling, that you spent away from me. So just stay back home. Let's just cuddle, drink wine, have a good time, and enjoy our life. We're married now. Within 2 years, the men were bloated, unattractive, a shadow of their former selves. And within a space of a year from that point, they complained that their wife says they don't look attractive enough. In other words, she had made him over, and now what she finds attractive was who he used to be, which he no longer is. But because he had been cooked in warm temperature water for such a long time, his self-image, self-identity had evaporated. The process of returning back to who he used to be required almost like a wake-up call. And usually, that often doesn't occur as frequently as it should. And number 4, I said, had to do with hobbies. The fact that she tries to get you to change, and that leads to almost a loss of your manhood. You know, change your hobbies, change your friends, choose new friends. She becomes your best friend. She wants you to confide in her on all issues. She wants you to refer to her in all matters. Again, it's what a union should be. But there is time. You know, the great book of Antiquities talked about a time for everything under the sun. Every man needs room to breathe. Every man needs space, just like every woman needs space. And so I would simply say that as part of the whole process of being in a committed relationship, men delude themselves into thinking that it would all be much better once they've left their single lifestyle, or once they've left the lifestyle of living separate lives in 2 separate locations. Once they consummate the union, move in together, get married, become civil partners, become exclusive, we delude ourselves into thinking that everything will be smooth sailing. It doesn't. 9 out of 10 times, it goes downhill. Except both parties are aware of the changes that take place, or that could take place, and they put in rituals and routines, and they have an agreement on how both parties would ensure that they keep each other at their optimal and their best state. You know, let people be free. Like my approach has been in every relationship and in business has always been, just leave people alone. Let people be free. I don't try to control people. I just know what I will not tolerate. And I found, both in business and in general relationships, that you have a much more fruitful and long-lasting relationship if you try not to define the terms too rigidly of the union, if you try not to define the terms too rigidly. If you simply say, well, this is what I like. And let the person say, this is what I like. And you overlay both on each other. And you allow time to sort itself out. If both of you have a, almost a union that works well, then perfect. But keep in mind that time will cause one or two of you to move away from where you've always been. And it's almost like a case of, as the saying goes, you're either creating or you're disintegrating. Nothing stays fixed. Nature doesn't even allow that. That's a law of nature. Nothing stays the same. You're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. The natural state of human beings is that we're moving backwards. In other words, we're dying. And that means in order for you to stay fixed in that position, you have to put in so much work. Otherwise, inertia doesn't leave you where you are. Relationships are hard work. Marriage is hard work. It's a full-time job. Which brings me to the conclusion, which is, if the ideal is nothing similar or comparable to the reality, and if post-marriage, all of the things that you want as a man are not achievable, then you have to stop and ask yourself the question, do I need to get married? My perspective is this: if you do not want to have children, I do not see a benefit to modern men. Again, this works, marriage in its concept, in its traditional concept, works across the whole world. It just so happens that in the developed West, we've lost our value system so much that we've thrown away what used to be a very, very, very unique part of our civilization. So if you don't want to have kids, I don't see a benefit to you being married. Number two, if you haven't achieved your dreams and you haven't achieved your goals, especially financially, you shouldn't get married. You shouldn't get married if you are below 35. You should only start considering marriage from 30. For men, now this is for men. For women, slightly different. I know this is more targeted to men, so let me just address women very briefly. The same concept applies. Women, if you do not want to have children, you shouldn't get married, because children will change your life for the better, for the worse, but it changes your life. Number two, if you haven't achieved your dreams and goals as a woman, you shouldn't get married, period. Number three, as a woman, you should not consider marriage until 27, minimum. And you should not get married before 27. Ideally, 28, perfect age. 28 to 30, perfect time. Perfect time to get married and have children, if you want to. So you can see that the advice I'm giving are consistent. At the center of the advice is that you should try to maximize your potential. And in many ways, marriage becomes an obstacle to you reaching your potential if you have it too early. So the advice applies. Again, I said in one of the earlier sessions that if you invert the advice to men that I'm providing, you can extrapolate and you would find that the advice for women is embedded in the same advice for men. Again, this is simply to teach women how men think or how men should think. But the principle applies. Now, let me say something perhaps that will not be too, how do I put this, received too warmly. If you're a man, all things considered, everything I have explained thus far, all things considered, what that means is that if you were to use a different analogy, let's use a car. Again, not a very, very, very accurate analogy, but serves a purpose. You can buy a car, and if you bought the car, at the point of buying the car, you own the car as an asset, but you also retain all the liabilities and the responsibilities that the car comes with. or you can rent the car. And every year, if you choose to, you can trade the car up for a newer model. Now, if everything I've shared so far resonates with you, something should be going through your head, which is, if everything about marriage, excluding the benefits, appears to be a net liability to the man, then the question would be, should you not consider the option of living separate lives, not moving in together, not getting married? And simply, that would mean that if the best days of any dating experiences is pre the union, pre-exclusivity, pre-marriage, pre-moving in together, pre-cohabiting, then it would mean that, which is my view, that the best times, the first 6 months of a relationship are usually the best. That could extend to 9 months. But that would mean that after about 9 months, most relationships tend to run their course. They're self-exhausting. And that would mean that perhaps, just perhaps, the idea of saying, okay, well, I don't want to have kids, I'm focusing on my dream, between the age of 18 and 35, I would treat my experiences the way I would make a business decision. And that would mean I date and I upgrade, and I date and I upgrade, and I date and I upgrade. Not a nice thing to say, but from a practical point of view, recognizing that the 18 years, 18 to 35, you should be focused like a laser on your purpose, your goals, your dream, becoming your best selves. You do not need a distraction. And marriage and women are distractions. And the only way you can keep your eye on the ball is to recognize that you would only engage in relationships where you can trade up. So you date for 6 months, you move on. You date for 9 months, you move on. You're not dating for the long term, because that's when the change begins. So you keep yourself fresh until you get to 35, at which point you can then decide on whether you're happy to pay the price for whatever benefit you may have identified would be accrued to you.